So I have the honor to say welcome up on stage, Abs and Chris. And I would like to start to ask you, how long have you been working at Omnia, Abs?
I was actually the first investor in the business, but I've been full-time with the business for just over 2 years.
All right. And Chris, you for Voi Technology?
3 years.
3 years.
But Voi's been around for 7.
All right. And what advice would you give yourself at that very first day that you stepped into the new office?
And I probably make friends as quickly as you can. I think mine is obviously a very different journey to a lot of people here in sort of procurement. As a sort of a business leader, it was to engage with lots of new staff, where actually in the top 5 fastest growing companies in Europe. So our office is changing daily, lots of new people. So it's all about sort of getting plugged in and getting to know everyone.
And Chris, what would you say to your 3-year-old younger self?
Start learning Swedish. Yeah.
Well, we have some Swedish-speaking speakers as well previously, so maybe you can catch up at the after work as well. And Chris, you follow all sports, but is there any sports that you absolutely couldn't live without?
I would say probably football. I'm a big Arsenal fan. But I think I really love all sports, so all of them really.
All of them. And Abs, you're also into sports, but I know that you're also a bit of workaholic. What would you say is the hardest? Is it switching off from work or convincing your wife to let you off to the golf course?
A bit of both, to be honest. I guess it's the privilege of being around a company that is pretty non-stop. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's a hard trade-off or anything like that. It's fun. I think my kids may differ in their opinion, but yeah.
And you have been kind enough to let me have a little break because you will take my role for a bit. So I will leave these gentlemen up on stage and I'll see you in a while.
Thank you. Awesome. So I guess very quickly, we're going to talk a bit about a procurement transformation journey that Chris has been on over at Voi. And maybe just to give everyone a little bit of context, Chris, would you mind introducing yourself and talking a little bit about what Voi does?
Sure. So I'm Chris. As mentioned, I've been at Voi for 3 years, and I lead indirect procurement at Voi. Voi is, for those of you who don't know, a Stockholm-founded micro-mobility company. That means that we provide sort of shared bikes and scooters to you guys going to work across sort of 110 cities, I think it is, in 14 countries in Western Europe.
Awesome. And maybe a little bit about your role and what it is you do there.
Yeah, so I'm leading indirect. When I first joined Voi, it was as the second member of a team of 2 covering indirect, and we also had 2 more people covering direct. And this was very much part of Voi's kind of scale-up journey. And our first priority, I think, was to really come in and cut some costs and start to act more maturely as a business and as a scale-up rather than a startup.
Awesome. And maybe just for the audience, so they get a state of kind of an understanding of what you inherited and what you walked into, could you maybe describe what procurement looked like when you joined, what the team was like, and what you inherited?
Yes. So there was some direct material expertise. We had some years of experience there that Voi had hired, but there was really nothing on the indirect side. It was pretty fragmented. We maybe had our top 10 agreements under control, but the rest were all stored in Google Drives in signed or unsigned state. So it was really no procurement or no indirect procurement really existing when I joined.
And what about technology-wise? You had the ERP, if I'm not mistaken, and what else existed?
So we had some data. We had NetSuite as an ERP, but we didn't really have anyone there who was tasked to actually look at the data.
So, and many people in the audience probably have a very different state. They have maybe established processes. They don't sort of have the freedom necessarily that you had to establish a clean process. But they'll likely be familiar with some of the pains you described, contracts in Google Drives. How would you describe the sort of the initial challenges? Like, where were the problems manifesting? What was what were you feeling?
I think there were 2 main ones. The first one, as I mentioned, actually understanding what agreements we had and what sort of validity were they in, without necessarily revealing to our suppliers how little we knew about the contracts we had. And then secondly, it was more around educating the business around what procurement can actually do for them. I think we were seen very much as the kind of make it cheaper function, but in reality, our role is so much more than that.
And you talked about the make it cheaper function. Did it feel quite bureaucratic internally? Was the perception that sort of negative, low net promoter score, that sort of thing, or not quite?
I think it wasn't necessarily bureaucratic. It was more that maybe sometimes a bit of bureaucracy would have helped, because we had people approving things and signing things that they had no right to be doing, and that could be quite a costly mistake.
And I think I think about a lot of the challenges that I hear, and from some of the conversations I've had earlier today, challenges around things like auto renewals, being involved late. With how did these things happen, and how did you diagnose that it was a tooling problem that sort of led to some of this shift?
I think with the auto renewals, it was just the standard terminology, which people weren't necessarily aware that you can try and negotiate away, or if you're not able to negotiate away, it's critical that you understand when that is going to kick in. And then sort of around the really teaching the business like when we can be involved and how it's much easier if we're involved earlier in the process as well.
And I think about a lot of procurement leaders, some I imagine are new in their roles. You're probably set with some pretty big targets around cost avoidance, savings. How realistic did that feel with the setup that you had? Was that sort of something that was daunting you, or?
I think coming in the first year with a greenfield setup, that a lot of those agreements were untouched and we had grown massively. I felt quite confident in the first year that we could hit our targets, and I think anyone should. But then it was more in the second year, after we'd done a lot of contract right sizing and leveraged that growth. And in the second year that I was there, we maybe didn't grow so much, but our targets didn't really get any smaller. And it was at that point that we realized, okay, we need to take a more structured and strategic approach here, because we've achieved most of the low-hanging fruit.
And how did you diagnose this? Like, where did you decide you wanted to start? What were the priorities for you as you set about making some of these changes?
So I think because we had the luxury of kind of building our own process with procurement as a focus, we were able to ask ourselves the question of, okay, what sort of information do I actually want to know before I kick off a project? And therefore it felt quite logical to start with a sort of intake form where we could gather the information up front. But I think the other issue was that we identified we were continually being brought in way too late in these projects to have a real impact. And that meant that I think something was broken at source, that people didn't feel like they could include us early enough. And maybe that was because they didn't know what we were doing, or they didn't necessarily know what sort of information was relevant for us. So we were able to, I think, with an intake form, alert people that we do actually care even when you're talking about budget allocation, we would like to know about it. And also, here are the things that we would like to know.
And then, that's sort of the positive side of the change, some of the things you need, but there's also the negative side and the friction and stuff for the end users. What were some of the things you were trying to avoid when you were making that change?
We definitely didn't want to create a ticketing system for procurement. I think that would be a very fast way to annoy a lot of people that you actually need to work with. And we didn't want to create a kind of long and bloated process. We needed a process that was flexible enough and agile enough to move at the speed at which we needed to do as well.
Awesome. And obviously we were privileged enough that you selected us as a technology provider to do a lot of this stuff. Can you maybe walk me through how you went about building that business case for technology, how you sort of landed on a tool like Omnea for other people who are considering kind of going through a transformation and using technology as that catalyst?
So I think, as I mentioned earlier, it was sort of in the second year where we had achieved some savings and we'd built some credibility with the organization, that we were able to step back and look at, okay, what do we want this process to look like moving forward? What are the key problems that we want to address? And that led us down the road of, we need to know more about these projects at an earlier focus, or at an earlier time, and focus a bit more on the process of buying, rather than having it being so fragmented and different standards applying in different geographies versus what we might think is happening sat centrally in the headquarters.
And, convincing the business to do this, was it a pretty obvious thing for them? Was it a no-brainer, or was there some selling you needed to do, some sort of case building, ROI? Yeah.
I mean, I definitely had to convince my manager that it wouldn't be a ticketing system, but then there was also a process of coalition building across the organization, working with some other functions, our finance function, but also our sustainability and our policy function, and addressing some of the pain points that they had when interacting with our supplier base. And then I think lastly, it was a promise to our C-suite that we would catch all auto renewals in the future.
And you kind of committed to that in blood. Yeah. And tell me a little bit about sort of, you sort of landed on Omnia, you implemented the system. 1 year on, what's changed now? How has your day-to-day evolved?
I would say it's two main things, and these might seem basic for more established procurement functions, but we're much more proactive than reactive in the work that we're doing, and that includes, checking in far in advance of renewal to get a kind of sense check or a pulse check of how the supplier is performing, kind of like implementing a QBR with your stakeholders. But also the variety of the work that I'm involved in has increased a lot. I think when I joined Voi, it was very much in a kind of HQ procurement role. And now it's much more of a group procurement because we have different projects taking place, out in our markets and buying happening there, which we're now more involved in.
And how important has sort of user experience of the tool been for you? And what I mean is, take Omnia away for this, just for the purpose of this discussion. But I think when we've spoke about it, engagement was really critical to drive procurement. How have you seen that manifest itself?
I think especially in indirect procurement, you can't necessarily stand between a budget holder and them doing what they want to do with their money. So you need to show that you can add value, and you need to show that working with you is a benefit. And I think user experience is actually critical to that, because if they have to work with something that's too complicated or that they don't understand, then why should they continue to involve you? And if you wouldn't put your customers through a process like that, why should you put your internal stakeholders through a process?
I said, and are you able to share any sort of results against any of those original targets? Sort of how have you actually kind of done?
I think I can say that we've continued to kind of hit our organizational goals despite the right sizing which has already taken place. But I think the main difference there is actually the visibility into the targets and into what we're working on, which before would have been a highly manual process and been a task in itself to pull together, which we now just have readily available.
And I think, often people kind of fail to understand how multi-departmental procurement is. It touches so many different stakeholders as part of an intake and approval process, the renewal. How is a tool and how is this sort of new approach that you've taken really impacted the other departments?
So I mentioned earlier the kind of coalition building, and I think the biggest impact has been on our kind of policy and our sustainability teams. We have, obligations to fulfill to our investors around our supply chain, which previously involved, highly manual Google Sheets and emails out to suppliers who may or may not respond. And we've been able to kind of build and automate that process completely in the tool, which has, I think, saved, half a role almost from that team. And then also our finance department being much more aware of different financial commitments that we've made in countries, things like vehicle leasing, which you can then account for slightly differently. And it's actually then benefiting the balance sheet directly as well.
And you've also been, I guess, you've had an interesting, role shift while you've been doing this, where folks in the team have left or folks in the team have sort of moved in and out of the role. How has tooling allowed you to sort of cut down headcount, repurpose headcount? What does it do?
I think it's probably allowed us to repurpose our headcount and have my role not be so HQ focused and actually lean in more and assist our markets, and probably meant that we didn't need to add an extra person into the markets team who could handle that, because I was able to take that on.
And how much of this stuff is being automated? Like, are you just getting visibility earlier and making just having earlier calls to spend your time sort of not manually shepherding tickets, but instead negotiating? Or are you actually seeing some autonomous processes break through where you don't need to get involved and step in a way you normally would have done?
I would say the automation has probably come most in, reviewing the initial intake form and then assigning manually at first, okay, I want this to flow this way, or I think this is fine flowing the kind of normal way. And then kind of already assigning who should approve that, when they should approve it, and having that logic already built in has assisted a lot with more automation than before.
And I guess I wouldn't say controversially, because I think it's now becoming the norm, but you were an early adopter of these types of technologies, new tools. I imagine you've had experience with some of these legacy systems in the past. What was the biggest difference in terms of, maybe was it the approach? Was it the quality of the tool? Like, what were some of the deciding factors almost?
Yeah, so I think in a previous life, I worked with one of these legacy tools, and I remember those meetings were just a long series of, no, we can't do that. No, that's not going to be possible. Oh, that's a custom field. That's going to cost you X amount. And I think the biggest difference, or what convinced me that we could actually implement a tool for this process, was that we were able to answer those questions with a yes rather than a no, and that I was able to kind of configure them myself almost instantly, rather than needing additional developer resources or hand-holding from a supplier.
So you're pretty hands-on in the tool, building workflows yourself, and
today,
yeah, that's awesome. And if bunch of CPOs, procurement leaders in the crowd, if you were advising them on how to start their process or their transformation, or trying to maybe even adopt AI, like what is your advice to them?
Try or make sure that you dedicate enough time to it. Don't expect it to be something that you can just complete on the side or on top of your day-to-day work. If it's a priority, you need to assign appropriate resources and time to it.
And do you think it should be the priority? Do you think it should be one of the first things a procurement leader should do?
I think I would say first things is understand the data that you have and clean that up. And then after that, you're able to automate it a bit more.
And did using a tool help you in that cleaning up journey at all? Or did you already have that sorted out prior to it?
Oh, it was a massive data discovery exercise. And that was also, I think, one of the reasons why we decided to do it, to be able to gain that visibility into the contract base that we had.
Nice. So I guess in one sentence, we need more sort of clean data and automation
Yeah, I would say you can't automate without clean data.
Awesome. And then just as sort of a last question, just before we head out to get some food, maybe tell us a fun story, maybe a negotiation you're really proud of, and how the tool has helped. Yeah.
I think the one I'm proudest of maybe happened earlier or last year. A stakeholder came to me that we needed an unlimited routing software to help guide our teams to our different vehicles to perform tasks on them around the city. I was immediately quite scared because unlimited sounds expensive. But because we had started in good time, I had time to manage his expectations or manage the demand a bit to realize that, okay, maybe we don't actually need unlimited routes. And that led to a 50x saving versus the planned budgeted spend for this, which always reminds me of the phrase that if you improve something by 10x, then you've probably done something quite smart. And if you improve something by 100x, then maybe you've stopped doing something stupid. So I think our project landed somewhere in the middle of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Really, really enjoy the conversation. And if anyone wants to learn a little bit more about Chris's transformation journey at Voi, or how Omnea could help you during your transformation, please do find us at the booth. Thank you very much.